Tonight, we're going to cover two topics. The topics that we will cover tonight are pesticide labeling and pesticide formulation. I am joined tonight with my co-host for this evening is Mr. Josh Britt. Josh is the area manager for Red River Specialties, located there in Ada. My name is Justin McDaniel. I'm the extension educator here in McLean County. And so we welcome each and every one of you. Hopefully we can make this process as easy as we can for you to get you through this. So tonight, to talk a little bit about pesticide labeling, this presentation is on the pesticide label. By looking at what is on a pesticide label, most aspects of pesticide safety and label understanding can be covered. Many labels can be difficult to read because the print may be too small, or it may be written at too high of a education level, too complex. Also, information to safely and properly apply the pesticide may be difficult to find. So pesticide product labeling is the main method of communication between the manufacturer and you, the end user, to ensure that that pesticide is being applied the best way that it can be. The product label is attached to the pesticide container, and it has the information that you will need to properly apply and utilize that chemical. Labeling includes the label plus all the other information you receive from the manufacturer about the product when you buy it. So there's a lot of things that many times we just take it out of the package and we throw some stuff away that could be particularly useful, but many times the label is really the most important. It's attached to the bottle. Many times we have problems with that because if we store that container for an extended period of time, many times that label can fade or get torn off and lost. The good thing about it is most of these labels now are found on the internet. So if you're pretty sure you remember what the chemical is, we can find the label to help you find how to use it. The labeling comes in the form of the pamphlet or brochures. By law,
you just read it.
You must have all the pesticide labelings with you when you apply the pesticide. Not just the pesticide container, but you need the label with you so that you can always refer to it whenever. So for labeling to the manufacturer, the label is the license to sell the product. That's what they have to do, their due diligence, to be able to use that to sell that product. To the medical personnel, if you are to become sick, it may be an important source of treatment information in case they think maybe you've been poisoned, how to treat you for that, what precautions they need to take, and what treatment protocols they need to abide by. To the applicator, which would typically be you, it is the directions on how to use the product safely and properly. To the government, it's the means for control. And most of the time, the way they control it is if it poses an unreasonable risk to people or the environment, they restrict it or they cancel it. We've had a lot of chemicals that got taken off the market because of misuse, misapplication, application off target. Examples are, we know DDT, chloridane, 2,4,5-T, all of those things have been canceled in the United States for many years. Even so late now as MSMA for a lot of applications for home lawns, things like that. Dursban, chemicals like that now that are being taken off the market because of lack of ability to control them and their application. So the easiest way to control it is just take them off the market. So for the government, that's how they use that label. The approval of the pesticide labeling by the EPA, they have to go through that registration before the product can be used. This is why so much of this pesticide, why it costs so much to get a pesticide labeled. The manufacturer must spend all the time and money ensuring that the pesticide is safe. It's safe when it's used properly to the environment and humans. The Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act provides for federal control of pesticides distribution, sale, and use. The EPA was given authority under this to study the consequences of pesticide usage and require users, which are farmers, utility companies, and others, to register when using or purchasing these pesticides. Through later amendments to the law, users must also take an exam for certification as applicators of pesticides. That's what you have already went through that to become a certified applicator, whether it's a private applicator for your own applications, or if you're a commercial applicator applying for the public for pay. You've already went through that. All these pesticides in the United States are registered. So they have been licensed through the EPA. They are registered there so that they know it's there. And that registration assures that the pesticide will be properly labeled and that if it's used in accordance with specifications, will not cause unreasonable harm to the environment. That's their main concern, is that if you use it the way that it's instructed or the way that it's labeled, it's not going to cause a lot of harm. You know, that doesn't take into consideration if a little bit works, a little bit more works, a little bit better. You know, because once we get off label, then that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about within specification. If you have questions concerning pesticides, you can contact the EPA's team in Denver at the number listed there, 1-800-227-8917. And they can discuss any of the pesticide concerns that you may have concerning labeling of whatever, from whatever angle that you're looking at. The types of registrations, there are three major types of registration. The federal registration, which is the Section 3. Federal registration means that the pesticide may be used in the United States. However, before it can be used in certain states, for instance, Wyoming Department of Agriculture charges a $75 fee per product before some things can be used. Special local needs means that the pesticide can only be used in local areas, usually in a state. If pesticide products have a special local need registration, they can't be, if they're only registered for Oklahoma, they can't be used in any other state. Special local needs that we will see in this state probably have a lot to do with cotton and cotton farmers in that Altus area. A lot of times they have some restrictions on phenoxy herbicide certain times a year. That'd be a special local need. Emergency exemptions from registration means that a pest problem has occurred for which there is a pesticide that will work on that pest, but the pesticide is not labeled for that pest. So you can petition the EPA for the Section 18 exemption that pesticides going through the normal registration process wouldn't have to do. Section 18s are only good for a short amount of time because they're an emergency. And once that emergency is over, that probably means the Section 18 exemption is gone. They usually are only good for that short period of time. They usually won't grant another Section 18 for the same pest problem. EPA encourages the state and pesticide manufacturers to seek a Section 3 registration, which would be where that pest would be on the label from that point on to be used according to the Section 3, to the normal label. The classifications of pesticide use, unclassified or general use, that's something you can buy over the counter. That's for general applicator, doesn't need a license. Things like Roundup, 2,4-D, Malathion, things that you can go to Walmart and buy over the counter, or Ace, or anywhere like that. You can go to your local feed store and you just, it's on the shelf, you pick it up, you bring it out, you take it home. Restricted use, that's why you have your pesticide applicator license. That's things like Tordon 22K, Lambda cyhalothrin as an insecticide, some of your other, anything that has a restricted emblem on it, those are the things that you'll actually need your license to purchase. So restricted use pesticides are a pesticide, or some of its uses are classified as restricted if it could cause harm to humans or to the environment, unless it's applied by a certified applicator, which has the knowledge to use these pesticides safely and effectively. This just shows that you have, as an applicator, have went a step above the average applicator, and you have educated yourself to do better, to read the label, to be a little more trustworthy with these chemicals, to know that they're going to be applied in a way that they're not going to put the environment in danger. Private applicators, that is for use or supervise the use of restricted use pesticides to produce an agriculture commodity on property owned or rented by themselves or their employer, or on the property of another person by whom they trade services. You cannot spray for hire with a private applicator license. And it's only for, the best I understand, they're out there, agriculture commodities on property. That doesn't mean you can go buy restricted use pesticides to spray houses. If you have a rent house, you can't go get termite spray to spray. It's got to be for an ag commodity, and you've got to own the property or be working for somebody that does. You're not being paid to do that specifically. If you start becoming paid, if you start getting paid, then you move into a commercial applicator. And those are people who use restricted use pesticides on property or for purposes other than listed for private applicators. That means they are spraying for hire. They are buying and distributing chemicals on property that does not belong to them, to people that they do not work for, and those people are paying them. Parts of the pesticide label. The information on pesticide labels usually is grouped under headings to make them easier to find. Still, even with that, some of these labels get very long. They still get to be very difficult to find. Some information is required by law to appear on a certain part of the label or under certain headings. Other information may be placed wherever the manufacturer chooses. Sometimes it turns into an Easter egg hunt, but most of the time the information is all there. It's just you have to be patient enough to look for it. The first thing that you're typically going to find is the brand name. Each manufacturer has a brand name for each of its products, and you have to be aware of choosing a product by brand name alone, because some of these things use some very fancy naming techniques. They may use the same basic brand name with only minor variations to designate different products. So it could make some of these things very difficult. Here's one that Tordon 22K. That is the brand name, the registered name for use in areas west of the Mississippi River on rangelands and grass pastures. So Tordon 22K is a name most people will recognize, but that is a brand name specifically trademarked to Dow AgriSciences. That means that no one else can use that name. They use something close, but they can't use that. Tordon 22K Tordon K is the same chemical as Tordon 22K. However, it's mainly for use in non-crop areas. So you can't use Tordon K in the same areas. Use Tordon 22K. To do so is a violation of federal law. So now when you look at those, you say, well, that says Tordon K. Well, that's different than Tordon 22K. But just to the casual observer, they may not pick up on that. So that means that you have to pay a little attention when you're buying these chemicals. Both are restricted use, but different application sites.
And we used that slide, Justin, as an example, because they've now made, obviously, Tordon is all one thing. Tordon K, 22K are all under the same label now. That was just used as an example of a labeling technique.
So what Josh just said there, if you didn't hear him, that they're all kind of under the same heading. They're just using it as a labeling technique. Same is true for Tordon RTU. RTU means that it's ready to use. It requires no dilution. So if you buy Tordon RTU and you bring it home and you dilute it with water like you would your Tordon 22K, you're not going to get the results that you're expecting. So be careful when you look at the brand names. Different companies may sell the same product under different brand names. 2,4-D products probably there are literally hundreds probably of brand names of 2,4-D amine. Weedar 64 is a 4-pound 2,4-D amine made by New Farm. Weed Pro 4 amine is a 4-pound 2,4-D amine made by Van D's Supply Company. So they're sold by two different companies, but there's no difference in them. So you look at them and you go, well, these are the same. Which one's the cheapest per gallon? Because if they're the same chemical, just a different name, well, you're probably going to want to buy whichever one of them's cheapest per gallon, right? Always read the ingredient statement to determine the active ingredient that the chemical contains, because chemicals may have several different brand names, but the active ingredient is always going to be the same for that chemical that's contained in that pesticide. That will not change. A pesticide label must list what is in the product. It must tell you what the active ingredients are, if there's more than one, and the amount of each ingredient as a percentage of the total. Because you may find chemicals that contain the same type of active ingredient, but different amounts. We see that with glyphosate. There are 3 or 4 different amounts of active ingredient in glyphosate products, 41, 46, 53. So that's something that you need to be aware of as you're buying it as well. It also lists the chemical name or the common name for each of the active ingredients. Also, the inert ingredients may not need to be named, but the label must show you the percentage of the total contents that they make up. For example, here, the active ingredient in Tordon 22K is picloram. Picloram is the common name for this pesticide active ingredient. Tordon 22K contains 2 pounds of picloram, the active ingredient. And you need to remember the common name because they don't change the active ingredient, because they don't change from manufacturer to manufacturer. The active ingredient picloram will be the same if it's Tordon 22K or picloram 22K or tree killer 22K, whatever it is. If it's picloram at 24.4%, then you know it's the same as Tordon 22K. You're buying the active ingredient. Usually the higher the amount percentage of that active ingredient, the more product you're getting for your money. So maybe the better buy it's going to be. These numbers are needed in case of poisoning or misuse claims, the EPA registration number and the EPA establishment number at the bottom. You'll need those in case you have to file a claim, or if someone gets sick, they'll want to know that registration number so that they can pull that product up quickly, and they have access to that label and all the information that they need without having to try to search for it. Registration number, the registration number indicates the pesticide label has been approved by the EPA. Most products contain two sets of numbers. The first set identifies the company. The second set identifies the product. So you may have several, if they're made by Dow AgroSciences or something like that, all of them will have the same company number, but different numbers for different products. Establishment number, that means the facility where the product was made, in case they have a problem and they start trying to track it, to maybe track it to a certain location, certain shift, to see if maybe there's been some other claims because of the chemical wasn't working. So if they're problems, then they can be traced back to the facility where they're made. Name and the address of the manufacturer is something that the law requires, that is put on the name and the address of the company. Here's an example: Monsanto Company, St. Louis, Missouri, got their zip code, United States of America. So if you need to know, that that's probably going to be headquarters. It may not be the location that it was made. That's going to be the headquarters to the main office. Net contents, that's something else you're going to see on there. That tells you how much product is in the container, whether it's pounds, ounces, whatever that may be, depending on the formulation of the product. It's going to give you a overall net contents of the amount of product that's in that container. The type of pesticide, this statement indicates what the product will control. Tordon 22K, that will control susceptible broadleaf weeds and woody plants. Then we've got a emulsifiable insecticide, fungicide. So it gives you an idea that if you're looking to control trees, to poison trees, you're not going to want to use the insecticide or the fungicide. You're going to want to use the herbicide, the Tordon 22K. But if you're spraying your wife's rose bushes in her yard, you probably want to avoid the Tordon 22K because it controls susceptible weeds and woody plants, which the rose bush would be that. And so that brief statement right there may tell you whether this is a product that you need to read on into to see if it works, or just that broad statement right there may say this is not the path we need to go down. So you can search something else. The type of formulation that label is, Josh is going to cover this a little bit more, but they'll tell you what the formulation of that product is, whether it's a wettable powder, a dust, liquid, whatever it may be, so that you know kind of how you have to handle it. Most of them are going to be in a liquid, but we do occasionally get some that are in different forms. Restricted use products are only to be applied by certified applicators or people under their direct supervision. Under direct supervision means that the certified applicator is responsible for training the people under their supervision to safely and properly apply the restricted use products. So we have what we call in Oklahoma service techs, and they work under a certified applicator. They're just the person at the end of the gun, and they are spraying. But that person that is certified, he is the one that is taking responsibility for that. Front panel precautionary statements. This is going to be one of the first things that you see because they feel like this is very important. That's the signal words. How toxic is this chemical? How dangerous is it? How much? Okay, I just seen Aaron's message here about the spreadsheet on CEUs on ODAF side. It should be accurate up to November 12th. Okay, Aaron, thanks for putting that on there. We'll look into that. If we want to know how toxic these are, the most toxic is highly toxic. Those the highly toxic, it comes with the signal word danger. And it will have the skull and crossbones poison. That means that is extremely toxic, and it takes a very little amount of it to cause extreme harm, sickness, maybe even death. We move into the middle where we maybe see the warning category. Warning signal words means it's moderately toxic. It's going to take a little more, but still something to be definitely careful with. The lower, relatively non-toxic may come with a caution signal word. Now, that's not a free-for-all just to take no caution with it, but be cautious with it and to use it and respect it still. But just because you say, well, it's relatively non-toxic, doesn't mean it's not toxic. It just means that there's a little more room for error, but it's not a green light to just apply however you want to. Okay, so the signal word danger, warning, or caution, that appears on the front panel of the label, because they want you to know that before you ever get into this, what you need to know. Signal words indicate how acutely toxic the product is to environment, to the humans. Typically, toxicity is listed by LD50 numbers. LD50 numbers are the amount that it takes to provide a lethal dose to 50% of a population, typically of lab rats. So when they administer it, however much it takes to kill 50% of those is toxicity. And then they will do it by inhalation. They'll do it orally in different ways like that, and they'll have different amounts. But immediately below that statement of the signal word is keep out of the reach of children, and it must appear on every label because it is imperative we keep it out of the reach of little hands that might become sick because of it. The signal words is not based on the active ingredients alone, but on the contents of the formulation. The active ingredients, the carriers, the solvents, or the inert ingredients all make up which one of these signal words and symbols may be used. That indicates the risk of acute effects from the four routes of exposure to a pesticide: oral, dermal, inhalation, and eyes, and is based on the one that is the greatest. So we see the acute effects, meaning quick. We can either have an acute effect, meaning that when we are subjected to it, we see the effects immediately, or maybe it's a long-term effect where we're seeing the effects years down the road. But they're looking at the acute effects, the here and now, and they're basing that LD50 on the oral amount, dermal amount, how much you have to breathe in, or in the eyes. And whichever one of those is greatest, it will move it into that signal word category. The signal word doesn't indicate the risk of delayed effects or allergic effects. There may be some people that have a allergic reaction to certain chemicals that other people may not have. So it's no indication as to those things, to certain people's risks, which you may have. So there's always that need to exercise caution. Using the signal words help you decide the precautionary measurements that are needed for protection. If this helps give you that foreknowledge of, if this is saying danger and poison, and you're not very careful, and you know that your own self, that you're not a very careful person, maybe you're clumsy, maybe you don't pay attention to detail, then this gives you the indication that you may not want to be using this product. Or you have an employee that you know doesn't really pay a lot of attention to detail. This may not be the right chemical for that person to be applied, just to save a lot of trouble down the road. The signal word that we're seeing here, danger, poison, highly toxic, very likely to cause acute illness, severe eye or skin injury, or even death. So this is an example of this, Furadan. Furadan is a very highly toxic pesticide. And it contains the danger, poison, signal, and the skull and crossbones. It does not take a lot of this chemical to be very deadly. Only a teaspoon, to take a taste to a teaspoon, take in my mouth, can cause death. So just a taste of it, or if you think about a teaspoon of it, that's still not much. But an LD50 of 0 to 50 milligram per kilogram parts per million would kill half the population. That's a LD50. So you're talking about just getting enough in your mouth that you can taste it, maybe all it takes to cause a severe reaction. This is, like we said, here's the LD50. It's the lethal oral dose in milligrams of toxicant per kilogram of body weight, which makes it out to be parts per million, required to kill 50% of the task population of animals. Like we said, usually rats or mice. And this information is used to estimate the toxicity of the pesticide to humans. We use mice because they will not let us use humans. I mean, that's the best way to determine the effectiveness on humans, but that they won't let us do that. So we use lab rats. What's an LD50? The lower the LD50, the more toxic the pesticide. Usually you're not going to see the LD50 on the pesticide on the labeling. It may be used to compare the relative toxicity of different chemicals. So we're not going to see this LD50, but based on that, there is a number. And we have an LD50 established for everything from pesticides to table salt. There is an LD50 for table salt. Taken in a strong enough dose, it can cause death. So just because it's something that we use doesn't mean that there's not a lethal dose of it. It just takes a whole lot of it. That LD50 number is way it's way high. And once it gets over about 2,500 milligrams per kilogram, that's where they stop. So products that have the signal word danger, they are, if they're due to skin and eye irritation potential, they will not carry the poison or the skull and crossbones symbol. So here only has the signal word danger. This is copper fungicide. So it is it's more of an eye protection needs to be worn with this, that's where the issues would be with that. So if we have the warning words, signal word warning, it's moderately likely to cause acute illness or skin or eye irritation from exposure. It'd take a teaspoon to 2 tablespoons by mouth to cause death of a normal sized human being. So that would put it in that LD50 of 50 to 500 milligrams per kilogram. So we're moving up quite a bit. So your Tordon 101 mixture, has a signal word warning. Caution, as we move on down in toxicity, slightly toxic or relatively non-toxic, only has the slight potential to cause an acute illness. So we're getting safer. If any, likely to be slight if you have any skin or eye irritation. It takes two tablespoons or more taken by mouth. And I'm wrong, it was 5,000 milligrams per kilogram, wasn't 2,500. So once we get over 5,000 milligrams per kilogram, it's just, that's where they just put it that. It could be, once it gets to 5,000, we don't know if it's 5,000, it could be 10,000 or 20,000, but they're only going to put 5 on most of them. Because after that, it's down to minor. Here's one that bears the caution signal word, and it is so it's one that you can feel a little safer with and using. So the signal words, once again, tells us a little bit all together here. The danger, taste a teaspoon, a warning, teaspoon to 2 tablespoons, a caution. It'll be in ounces or greater. So before of the active ingredient before you begin to experience acute illness. The toxicity is the measure of the ability of the pesticide to cause harmful effects. And what makes a pesticide more toxic is its active ingredient, possibly its carrier, the inert ingredients, or maybe even the formulation that it's in to make that more hazardous. So when we look at hazard is toxicity times exposure. The dose is in the poison. The poison is in the dose. It should be. So it may not be extremely toxic, but if we are swimming in it, that's different. So you can take low toxicity with high exposure and still have a hazard. You can take low toxicity, or you can take high toxicity with low exposure and still have a hazard. So you can have a low toxicity or exposure, but if you offset that with the high on the other side, you can still make it poisonous, toxic. Exposure is the amount of pesticide you're exposed to through oral, dermal, or inhalation contact. And we know we get a lot of exposure through dermal, through the covering of our skin. And we know that probably most of our exposure comes from dermal exposure because we have so much exposed skin on our face, ears, hands. If we're wearing a short sleeve shirt, all of our arms. And so the better job we can do to keep that exposure down to those areas and breathing it, the better off we are. Remembering the lower the LD50, the more toxic the chemical. The higher, the better. Some examples of an LD50: aspirin, 1,750 milligrams per kilogram. Tordon, 8,200 milligrams per kilogram. Like I said, once we get over 5,000, it doesn't even matter. Roundup's 5,400. Timic is 6.2 milligrams per kilogram. Timic is probably one of those that are a little scary. But look at table salt. Table salt right there is 3,300. So Tordon and Roundup have a higher LD50 than table salt. So you will die from taking table salt, according to this, before you'll die from taking Roundup or Tordon. Just inhaling it or absorbing it. Not saying that that's what I want to start putting on my mashed potatoes in the afternoon, but just goes to show the level of toxicity. What toxicity category does cyclone fall into? It's highly toxic because you see the signal word danger, poison, and the skull and crossbones. So we see the dermal absorption rates, pesticide exposure. A person can be exposed to pesticide by oral. That means we drink it. It gets, occasionally we have seen people that moved window cleaner into a bottle, and window cleaner being blue, and some little kid thinks that it's Gatorade and drinks it and gets sick from it. So typically we don't just drink pesticide, but accidentally getting splashed in our mouth or something like that gets splashed in our drink. We drink it that way. Inhalation, we probably have a better chance of that because we breathe that pesticide spray or the fumes while we're mixing it and while we're applying it. And then dermal, that is absorption through the skin, and that's the most common route for our exposure. So in a dermal exposure, where do we get a lot of absorption from? You think about blood flow to an area, and that's probably where you're going to get more exposure. Your scalp, your forehead. If you cut your scalp, if you get a cut in the top of your head, what happens? It bleeds, doesn't it? Bleeds a lot. And so you can see that we got another. We can see that the absorption rates are very high there. The scalp, the forehead, ear canals. But the highest one is the groin area. And you think about that. Well, if you're applying, you go to use the restroom. That's when you need to wash your hands because your body doesn't absorb pesticides at the same rate. It depends on what part of the body is exposed. If your forearm has an absorption rate of 1, that means your head region will absorb the pesticide about 4 times more rapidly than your forearm, and your groin area will absorb the pesticides about 12 times more rapidly. That's why we need to be careful to protect these areas to keep that from happening. And even the ball of your foot, you're wearing shoes with holes in them, and the pesticide, you walk through it and it gets in your socks. It could even happen there. So exercising some caution there to keep those things from happening. So here's some pictures of insecticide exposures, and this slide series shows how a person may be exposed to pesticides if proper safety precautions are not taken. The people in these sites have not actually been exposed to pesticides. They've been exposed to a powder that shows up under ultraviolet light. So the first one we see, this is a lock and load or a closed handling system designed to minimize exposure to a dry formulation of insecticide. And this insecticide is called Counter. And Counter is a highly toxic organophosphate insecticide. And it's fortunate that this person was wearing pesticide resistant gloves, because you can see the next slide, you can see there is how much of that powder was on those gloves. And it's highly toxic, so he has enough on him to cause a big problem. This person's using the closed handling system without protective equipment. So how safe is he? Instead of being on the gloves, now it's on his hands. What's he going to do with his hands? Wipe the sweat on his face, eat a sandwich. He then becomes ill with flu-like symptoms as soon as he has the flu. Next time he uses the closed handling system, he still doesn't use protective equipment because he's hadn't associated his flu-like symptoms with the exposure to the insecticide. And so the process continues. This loading system is not a closed system, and it's good that he has protective equipment. He's just pouring it in there. When they look at him under a black light, where would this pesticide be without the protective equipment? Be on his clothes. His clothes could then be worn home to expose his family to the pesticide. And if it was washed with the family's clothing, it could transfer that over to their clothing as well so that they're wearing it later. Even with protective equipment, there may be some exposure. Look under his chin. You see the color on his chin, under his chin, around his ears, and between his eyes where the goggles didn't cover. So even with all of that, he still had some minor exposure, even wearing protective equipment. But he minimized it at least to a smaller amount. Here's a person that thinks that the way that Dad does it must be okay. And you may see why from the next slide. Look at where his exposure was. He's covered with residue. And what about his t-shirt? Did it provide any protection? And how much protection could a little cotton t-shirt provide? I mean, it's all up in his nose. And I mean, so the inhalation factor, it's around his mouth. So he's getting exposure through dermal, oral, and inhalation. All three. So how much protection did the t-shirt provide? Take the t-shirt off. It went through the weave in the t-shirt, contaminates his skin. So it wouldn't be any great big mystery if this young man got sick. It would be really easy to see why. Here's a person that must always think when using a pesticide, even though you may have protective gloves on, you can't touch unprotected parts of your face. You know, he was wearing glasses, but then he rubbed his nose with his gloves and got it on his nose. So he's definitely breathing it, and more than likely it's on his mustache there. So he's probably got it in his mouth. So he's got all three forms of exposure as well. You know, you may think that you're adequately protected and still suffer from an exposure. Look at this young man's face. He had scalp protection. He had eye protection and coveralls. His face shield may help reduce the exposure to his face a little bit, but around his ears, in his ear canal, up around his nose, still a lot. So you think about, how do you open your containers? Maybe use your pocket knife. What are you going to use that pocket knife for? Cut an apple, spread peanut butter on his crackers? You know, not only do we need to follow the label directions for protective clothing and equipment, we must continually think about what else we're using that may receive some of this pesticide onto it. So don't take your pocket knife out of the equation. If you use it to open something with, make sure you clean it very well or use it for anything else. Labels contain information on what to do in case of accidental poisoning. So right here is the practical treatment. Sometimes they will tell you to induce vomiting. Sometimes they'll tell you not to, because of the danger of, if you vomit it up, it can do more damage to your throat. So it's not always, it's based on chemical to chemical. What are the signs and symptoms of pesticide poisoning? Could be muscle weakness, tremoring, cramps, vomiting. Could be a rapid heartbeat, elevated blood pressure, salivation, blurred vision. Could be convulsions, headaches, sweating, tightness of the chest. All these things could be a symptom. They could be a symptom of a lot of things, but a lot of these are symptoms of an overexposure to a pesticide. The personal protection equipment statement: by law, you must wear the safety clothing and equipment that is listed on the label. If you choose, you can wear more, but you can't wear less. And this is a good time to show and explain pesticide safety equipment with your workers. You know, when you go through the label, that's a good time to visit with your employees about what they need to be wearing and what you need to have on hand when you're applying these chemicals. So if you think you were overexposed to a pesticide, what do? You can call the poison center, and I can't hardly even read that number without singing it like the little song, the 1-800-222-1222. But it is 1-800-222-1222. But that is the emergency phone number for the Poison Control Center. And they have all of the information of all the chemicals that have an EPA registration and can give you that information if you don't have contact to it immediately. Environmental hazards. So will they cause an endangerment to the environment? If so, what do they need to do to, what type of danger do they pose? And what do we need to do to offset that, to ensure it doesn't happen? Maybe you see statements like a pesticide that is extremely toxic to aquatic invertebrates, or maybe it's a bee caution, may kill honeybees in substantial numbers. We know that maintaining honeybees, we have a lot of people that have started to keep honeybees. So we want to try to preserve them as well as we can. Maybe they're toxic to fish, things like that. Do not contaminate equipment when cleaning equipment or applying the pesticide. This is where they typically tell you to leave a stop gap or an air gap when you're loading your sprayers. When you load your sprayer, a lot of times people will take their sprayer and they'll throw their water hose over into the sprayer. And a lot of people have frost-free hydrants. And if the water goes off, what do those frost-free hydrants do? They start to pull that water back, to siphon back. So now you've got chemical in your sprayer that is being siphoned back into the water supply. So you've just contaminated not only your water supply, but everybody else that's on the rural water route with you, their water supply as well. And that can be a big problem. So whatever we're doing, don't contaminate the water. This is probably referring to here an open body of water. So we're not going to clean out, rinse out our sprayer next to where it runs off in the pond, or we're not going to spray over the pond with a chemical that's not labeled for that and cause any undue risk for having a problem. Physical or chemical hazards. Is it capable of exploding? Is it fire? Chemical hazards that it may pose. If it's flammable, it will say something like, do not use, pour, or spill, store near heat or flame. Do not cut or weld on the container. I mean, I don't know, but someone apparently has, that's why it's on there. Contains misuse statements. Some of the directions on there, it's a federal violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with the labeling. Many times people consider that overuse. So if the label says the label rate is this, we consider misuse that we've applied more than that. Underuse, under application is just as illegal as over application. You say, why that? Well, because it creates a resistance quicker when we under apply a chemical as over apply. So the label is the law. And if we use it outside of that label, we are in violation. Any also contains sections on storage, disposal, entry, and specific directions for using the product. It's illegal to use a pesticide in any way not permitted by the label. They are requirements. They're not suggestions. They are requirements. So if it's on the label, it doesn't matter what someone else has told you. You need to follow the label. Federal law does allow you to use a pesticide at any dosage or concentration or frequency less than listed on the label. Let's read that again. Federal law does allow you to apply a pesticide at any dosage, concentration, or frequency less than listed on the label. I never thought that was right. I have to go back and check on that. I wouldn't bet my paycheck on that one. So it's saying here that apply pesticide against any target pest not listed on the label if the application is to a plant, animal, or site that is listed. So if you do that, you just have to make sure you're in the right, you're applying it somewhere. And if that off-target pest is controlled, well, that's just a bonus as well. You can use appropriate equipment or methods of application that is not prohibited by the labeling. So if it doesn't tell you can't, that's how you can apply it. Mix the pesticide with a fertilizer if the mixture is not prohibited by the labeling. Mix 2 or more pesticides if all the dosages are at or below the recommended rate. The directions for use, the entry statements tell you how much time must pass before people can re-enter a treated area except under special circumstances. Re-entry intervals are amount of time that once you spray, you can't let the workers in there. It'll say something like, do not enter or allow workers to enter in treated areas during the restricted interval of 12 hours. So if you're going to want to start harvesting the next morning, you want to spray that afternoon before. Give it that time. If required by the label, you must post the area that has been treated. This will let people know that they can safely re-enter the area without safety clothing or equipment. And it also lets them know if that area is still under exposure so that they don't enter it before the time has come. With some pesticides, you must wait a certain amount of time after application before you harvest the crop for consumption. This will keep pesticide residuals within legal tolerance in the harvested crop. So if you're spraying, a lot of times with applicators spraying pasture, they're worried about how long it can be before they graze their livestock or how long it has to be before they can cut hay. Here's one that says for potatoes, don't apply within 14 days of harvest. All of these labels will tell you those kind of information. If you're worried about, can you graze your cows or how long do I have to wait before I cut my hay? The labels will tell you all of that. All labels contain instructions for storing the pesticide. Like I said, it tells us the first thing we see is to keep it out of out of the reach of children. And do not store in temperatures below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't want to have a lot of them won't freeze, but it may reduce the effectiveness of them if we do put them in some of those areas. Labeling also contains instructions for disposal of pesticides. Pesticide disposals, waste result from the use of this product may be disposed on an on-site or an approved waste disposal facility. The best way for you to dispose of a pesticide is use it up per label on an approved site to an approved target pest. And then disposing of the container will be the only thing you have to dispose of. But if we can dispose of the pesticide itself by spraying it out at the proper labeled rate, that is the most accepted method for disposing of that pesticide. So the plastic, the container, we don't want to reuse those to carry water to livestock or diesel to tractors, things like that. Triple rinse or equivalent, puncture and dispose of it in a sanitary landfill. So we triple rinse it and then we collect that rinsate and we spray it or we dispose of it. Don't just take the rinsate and go pour it out in the bar ditch. That's not correct. And then it is illegal to burn plastic containers for pesticide in the state of Oklahoma. It is illegal. It doesn't matter. That is a state law. It says if you burn it, stay out of the smoke, but it is illegal to burn plastic containers used for pesticide containers in the state of Oklahoma. Do not burn them. So once you've got that, then you can shake them. If you're triple rinsing them, shaking them out. If you use something like this, these things connect to a water hose and they pressure rinse them. They save money by using all the product. Use plastic or metal containers. It also destroys the container, so it can't be used to hold any other liquid. So even if you throw it away, keep somebody else from digging it out of the trash and using it. And it looks like the fuel handle. A lot of them that we see look like the fuel handle on a diesel pump or something. You just stab it into the container through the side, pull the handle, and it squirts water in there. You shake it up, rinse it out, squirt it full again. Same thing. When you're done with it, it does a real good job of cleaning those containers to be disposed of. Use directions will tell you the pest that the product will control, the plant, animal, or site that the product will work on, and in what form the product should be applied. Those are all very important when you select a chemical. The correct equipment to use, how much to use, and how to mix it, at what rates to mix it, and what order to mix it, all of those things. If the product can be mixed with other products, there are certain products that we have out there that if you mix them incorrectly, they will gel, they will clabber up, make an awful mess inside of a spray tank. There are certain sprays that we have that will stain. So if you're spraying, you don't want to spray by someone's vinyl fence and stain it, and then it won't come off. And then where, when, and how often the product should be applied. Can it be applied one time a year, or can it be applied multiple times a year? If so, when? And what is the site where you can apply it? Some directions for use may be contained in documents that are only referred to on the product labeling. So you may have to go there to find it. Some of the things that they will give reference to is groundwater protection, endangered species protection, worker protection, and then transportation, storage, and disposal of that pesticide. We need to protect our groundwater because 90% of rural residents rely on this groundwater for their drinking water. We all rely on some form of groundwater for our drinking water, so it is imperative that we protect it. Pesticides have a potential to contaminate water. Pesticides that we have that are capable of contaminating water, those that are highly soluble in the water, those that are persistent, things like Tordon that stays around for multiple months, years, Banville, any of those things that have a residual in the soil that can travel, and then low absorption to soil particles. That means that they're just going to stay loose in the soil and be carried about whichever way the water flow is moving. Endangered Species Act. To comply with the Endangered Species Act, EPA must ensure that the registered pesticides do not adversely affect, threaten, or endanger species or modify critical habitat when used as directed. So whatever part of the state you're in, if there's an endangered species, it may be listed that you have to exercise caution to use that. If you're concerned about that, you can consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. The worker protection standard is intended to reduce the risk of pesticide poisoning and injuries among agricultural workers who could be potentially exposed to pesticide residuals, and to reduce the risk of pesticide poisoning and injuries among pesticide handlers who may face more hazardous levels of exposure. Those pesticide handlers differ from the workers. The workers are only doing the harvesting and things like that. The handlers are the ones that are actually mixing and loading and applying the chemicals. So they have the greater risk of being exposed. EPA has issued regulations governing the protection of workers from agricultural pesticides. These regulations include workers performing hand labor, operations on farm and in forests, nurseries and greenhouses, and employees who mix, load, and apply pesticides in these locations. So that's what these standards were set to help protect these people. The EPA worker protection standards do not cover pesticides applied to pasture, range, or livestock, or on harvested portions of plants, or on harvested timber. They don't apply to control of vertebrates such as rodents. They don't apply to plants that are in golf courses or right-of-ways or public or private lawns, or plants that were intended for decorative or ornamental use, for mosquito abatement, or for structural pest control such as termite control, and for research use. Range and pastures they're exempt, as well as all right-of-ways from worker protection. So we need to read the label to see if we comply with all of those standards. Directions for use put a considerable burden on the applicator because it's up to you to determine whether you are affected. And it's up to you to make sure that you cover all of your bases so that you comply with the instructions and the requirements. Read the label. Just read the label. It doesn't matter what you've been told. Read the label. It also doesn't matter how many times you've applied this chemical at the beginning of the season. Read the label, because maybe the chemical you bought has a different formulation and it has a different set of labels, and it's not the same chemical you were applying last year. Maybe it looks the same, but the label may have changed. So it's not a bad idea to always familiarize yourself with the label at the beginning of every season. And I know many of you think, well, I do this every day, I've got this, but it's up to you to read the label, because you're going to be held responsible for that if there's a problem. What's the MSDS sheet? Material Safety Data Sheet. That's a document that provides information about the hazard of the chemical. state and federal law requires all manufacturers and distributors of chemical products provide the end user with a manufacturer-specific material safety data sheet. That informs you as the end user about the physical properties and related health effects, what kind of PPE equipment is necessary to protect you, if there is an exposure, first aid treatment, how to respond to accidents, and the planning that may be necessary in order to safely handle a spill if there were to happen to be one. You are required to keep one on file for each chemical that you use. When a chemical is ordered, the manufacturer will provide the MSDS sheet in the shipment. But you can access those through electronic databases, and they are available online. Here's one right here that if you need one for Tordon 22K, you go to it, submit it, and it'll pull it up for you. You can print it out from there. Here's one MSDS sheet for acetone. And we won't cover all the stuff that they show in it. With that, we are we're through with labels. And so now we'll turn it over to Josh.
Okay, folks, we're gonna get started on herbicide formulations. Thanks again for joining our school tonight, our class. My name's Josh Britt. I am the area manager for Red River Specialties in Ada, Oklahoma. We have about 40 minutes or so left. I'll try to get through this as quick as I can, and get y'all on about your merry way tonight. Okay, what is a formulation? All the ingredients in a pesticide product, the active ingredients or control chemical, the inactive ingredients or inerts. Usually formulations are diluted in water, a solvent, or other dilutants. Types of formulations. First of all, we'll go over liquids. Couple of abbreviations you'll see for liquids or emulsifiable concentrates is EC or E. We see some advantages and disadvantages there. Some of the advantages are ECs are easy to handle, transport, and store. They require very little agitation. They're non-abrasive. They don't eat up your pumps, things like that. Don't plug screens or nozzles, and there's very little residue. Some of the disadvantages are they are higher concentration. Justin talked about exposure. They're more easily absorbed through the skin. The solvents can cause surfaces to deteriorate, paint, things like that could be a concern. And some of them are flammable or corrosive. If you see the designation S on there, those are solutions, which they dissolve readily in a liquid solvent. When mixed, they form a solution that will not settle out or separate. You've heard people say they go to open a jug and they see chocolate milk. You see the two forms separate. These don't tend to do that. Formulations of these usually contain the active ingredient, the solvent, and one or more other ingredients. Concentrate solutions, C or Cl is what you'll see. These come highly concentrated. They must be further diluted. They're not a ready to use product. They are highly concentrated. So they do need to be diluted. They mix readily with little to no agitation required. And there are limited number of formulations. Ultra low volume, ULV. I'm not familiar with a whole lot of these personally, but the advantages are they're relatively easy to handle. There's little agitation required. You don't see these plugging screens and nozzles, not abrasive to equipment. Some of the disadvantages are they have a higher drift hazard, meaning a lot of off-target application could happen. There's specialized equipment that is required. I would probably say they would have a certain micron designation that you have to have to prevent that high drift. They're easily absorbed through the skin. Again, that toxicity and you know, the use of PPE on those would probably be a little higher requirement. And the solvents can deteriorate equipment parts. Flowables, F or L. We see quite a few flowables in this business. They're getting a lot more popular. They are insoluble solids mixed with water and other inert ingredients to form a suspension. They're easy to handle and apply. They require moderate agitation, which a lot of these application, a lot of this application equipment will have jet agitation. Some will have paddle agitation. We will discuss that in one of our other meetings when we talk about application equipment. You'll understand more about the different forms of agitation. And another part of this is it may leave a visible residue. Be more rinsing required, things of that nature. Aerosols. We see a lot of aerosols in our in the pest control side of the business. I don't think many on this this Zoom tonight will be pest control operators. There may be a few, but we see foggers are a example of aerosols. They're ready to use, easily stored, convenient, and retain potency. Some of the disadvantages would be practical for very limited uses. Aerosols, if you're using them, when you have if you have a huge area that's separated by walls, things like that, they're less effective. They may cover 2,000 square feet, if there's not walls in between, but limited uses in that area. Risk of inhalation. Aerosols are a sort of gas, so the inhalation risk is higher. They're hazardous if punctured or overheated or used near open flame because they're under pressure, and they're difficult to confine to target site or pest. Invert emulsions. Invert emulsions, water-soluble pesticide with an oil-based carrier. They form larger droplets that do not drift easily and commonly used in vegetation control along rights of ways. I know there'll be a few people on this call tonight that use these type of products. We're going to get into a dry formulation now. We see on the screen dust. These are getting a little bit less common. Some of the advantages, no mixing, ready to use, require simple equipment, such as puffers. You'll hear puffers. They're effective in hard to reach areas. Believe it or not, they're using these for things like cockroaches, bed bugs, things of that nature. They're a good choice where moisture from a spray would cause damage. But there again, there's disadvantages. Easily drift off target. Wind blows the dust. They don't stick to surfaces. Again, they're inhalation hazards, may irritate eyes, nose, throat, and skin, and it's difficult to get even distribution of the material. Baits, you see more baits used in pest control, but the advantages are ready to use, selective site application, control pests that move in and out of an area. Baits can be attractive to children and animals. They see them, they want to know what they are, they pick them up, they touch them, things of that nature. And some of the baits may kill non-target animals. Not to mention dead pests can cause an odor problem. This is where we're starting to see a few more things that you guys deal with on a daily basis. Granules are becoming really popular. Most granules are ready to use with no mixing. They have a low drift hazard. Easily measured and mixed. On the label, it'll tell you, so many ounces or so many pounds per acre. There's little hazard to the applicator. Simple application equipment, and granules are for a slow release application. You put them out now and they break down over time, allowing absorption over a longer period. The disadvantages is this is not a foliar type product, means the plant doesn't take it in from the leaves. It may need to be incorporated into the soil, and may need moisture to activate. A lot of times the labels say it needs to be watered in, and most of these products can be hazardous to non-target species. The designation P or PS is for pellets. A lot of you might be familiar with Spike 20P. Spike 20P is a pellet herbicide used for brush control, woody plant control. It's similar to a granular form, just larger, and all the particles are the same shape and size. Wettable powders, WP or W, you'll see these on several products out now. There's a lot of spray pattern or dyes that have the WP designation. The advantages are easy to store, handle, and transport, less likely than emulsified concentrates and others to cause harm to treated target. Easily measured and mixed. Less skin and eye absorption than ECs and other liquids. The disadvantages on this one are going to be inhalation hazard to the applicator while pouring and mixing the concentrated powder. one of the drawbacks you will see here is, I know a lot of the applicators that I deal with, usually when we do our classes like this, we get to talking about respirators and some of that. We will talk about some of these products and the PPE that they require on next, I think it's next Tuesday's class will be about PPE. But when you're using a wettable powder, an inhalation hazard is there, and a respirator may be a positive thing to have on your truck. The one thing with the wettable powder, it does require constant agitation, whether it be jet or paddle agitation, mechanical agitation of some kind. And it can be abrasive to the pumps and nozzles, clogged nozzles, screens, tips, if it's not completely dissolved. And you may actually have visible residues. Water soluble powders, SP or WSP. If you I see a lot of the dyes that are this way as well. Depending on what company you buy them from, you'll see several WSPs when it comes to adjuvants and surfactants. Ammonium sulfate comes in a WSP. And then, like I said, some dyes. They look like wettable powders. They dissolve readily and form a true solution. Again, you're going to have an inhalation hazard with these. Someone like myself that's an asthmatic or has respiratory problems of any kind, you might want to caution yourself when using one of these products like this. Very few pesticides are available in this form now, though, but there are several surfactants and adjuvants that are still available. Little disclaimer here for me. This is one that I am not familiar with at all. I don't know one of these that I sell. If I do, I can't think of one. So I'm just going to skip over it. But again, he was talking about hazards to animals, endangered species, things like that. Justin was on his talk. If you look at this right here, special honeybee risk, these are things that people are getting increasingly passionate about in our business. We need to really be cautious of pollinators. Pollinators are a huge concern in our industry now. I've heard some of the applicators at some of our trade shows and things like that kind of talk under their breath about honeybees, but honeybees are a necessity for us to continue having business. Pollinators, pollination is required for most everything that grows. So most of our products are not directly harmful to bees, but can be harmful to their environment, their habitat. So we need to be concerned about bees and other pollinators. WDG or DF, some products that come to mind is going to be prodiamine. I know several of you guys probably do use or have used prodiamine. Or the DF designation is going to be A product called Crovar, or some of your 40/40 blends will be a DF. I think the old Crovar actually had Crovar DF designation. I think it's now IVM, but it is still a DF formulation. It's going to be similar to wettable powders. These products are more easily measured and mixed. Most of them come in bags that are, 6 pounds, 8 pounds, 10 pounds, or 25 pounds, depending on the actual labeled rate of those products. A lot of the applicators I deal with say, okay, well, that's a 6 pound bags, and I need 12 pounds per acre. So, that's 2 bags per acre. My tank will do 3 acres. Well, you do the math. It just makes it easier to measure. These are less of an inhalation hazard during pouring and mixing due to they're a little bit bigger granule, not quite as dusty. The product is in a little bit bigger. I wouldn't want to call it a prill, but the size is a little bigger. Fumigants. I don't know too many applicators that have the fumigation license anymore, but we'll go ahead and cover this. The fumigants advantages are they're toxic to a wide range of pests. They can penetrate tight areas, and a single treatment will usually kill most pests. I know nematodes, one of the only ways to get rid of nematodes is fumigants. Some of the disadvantages are the target site must be enclosed to prevent gas from escaping. They're highly toxic to all living organisms, and they require specialized PPE and application equipment. Adjuvants and surfactants. Basically, the definition of that is going to be surface active ingredients. Like I mentioned in the couple of slides previous to this one, some of the examples are wetting agents, emulsifiers, invert emulsifiers, spreader stickers, penetrants, foaming agents, thickeners, safeners, compatibility agents, buffers, and anti-foaming agents. We see a lot of these in use in our daily applications. I don't know too many applicators that put a herbicide out without having an adjuvant or surfactant. That's also going to be another section in a few nights is going to be adjuvants and surfactants. We'll cover several of them and the different formulations that they're in. But most everyone that's on this call tonight or this Zoom meeting has used an adjuvant or a surfactant. That's about all the material that we have to cover. I'd like to thank everybody for joining in tonight. Thank you all for attending.